everyone. We're here back with Jim Malcom, and welcome to ACELab360. And today we're going to talk more about the VUZE camera, and he's going to show us more about the software and how it works. So, yeah.
Good. Thanks for having me back again. I'm excited about the opportunity to show people a little bit more about the software. The camera itself, as we talked about before, is a virtual reality camera. So it captures both a left and a right eye, 360-degree 3D VR video, together with ambisonic audio. So the camera itself is a shoot and store device. It stores all the data onto a micro SD card inside the camera. But then we bring that to life when we move it over to the software on the computer itself.
Nice, nice. So could you just walk us through, like, what do you do when you have the footage, and then how?
Yeah, so once you're ready to work on something, you would simply just choose what it is that you want to work on. I'm going to hit new project here for a minute. Very simple browsing architecture lets you go through, find a video that you want to work with. Let's go ahead and use one that's inside of this barn just for giggles. Let's go with this one. I don't know. Doesn't really matter. But we bring up a video. Oh, actually, we're upstairs. So this will be kind of interesting. You'll see that this is me turning the camera on and off. Now, you can connect the camera via Wi-Fi to your mobile phone and use your mobile phone to remote start and stop the camera and control the camera, as well as set exposure and what have you. In this particular shot, I simply reached over and turned the camera on. So I think at some point what I'm going to do is do a little reel of people running and hiding from the camera itself. So get people out of the scene. But the Humaneyes software is extremely simple, because once we move in, and let's just say we want to do this as our in mark, I can just hit the letter I on the keyboard. And what the software has done now is put in a little in mark on my edit, so it will start to render from that point forward.
Okay.
So that's probably the easiest thing.
And would that be different than these two? Because I know that clips the footage.
Exactly. So it clips it. So you can use this marker just as a click to click in, this other marker here to click your out point, or you can hit I and O on the keyboard, and including things like your space bar, which is the pause. So mirroring a lot of video editing software packages on how we deal with working on video.
That's nice.
So once we decide, let's just say this is our in mark right here, what I can do is, well, you know what, let's just go through the whole, let's go to all the software for a second. So one thing that people will do sometimes is they actually mount the camera upside down. So for example, they'll suspend it from the ceiling or hang it underneath a drone, these types of things. So this first little icon up here lets you flip your video.
Oh, that's useful.
So super simple. You do want to always make sure you shoot with a flat horizon. So unlike a regular 360 camera where you can have your horizon off and correct it later, in stereo you want to have a flat horizon, left and right eye, because your parallax for depth and everything are keyed off of that. So you do want to have your camera flat when you shoot. So this is just simply a way to flip your horizon. This second button here is another really simple one, and that lets you choose your center. So the camera itself actually has a front, which is this side of it here, opposite of where your memory card is. So by default, that's going to be your center or your field of view. However, when you go back and you start editing and creating your film, maybe I really want my viewer to start looking over here, or start them looking over there. That's what I can choose here. And it allows me to choose that default field of view that I want people to look at when they put on the headset. Okay.
That's really cool.
This third icon down here is something that we call cut field of view. So this allows me to choose, let's say for example, I only wanted to render 180-degree field of view, right? I can choose what part of the video I actually want to render here. Everything that's outside of that selection is going to just be rendered as black video.
And could you render, like, can you key this, for example, and maybe render parts of it in different, like, is that a thing that's possible?
Absolutely. You can go in and you can render the same video content in different pieces, and then you can assemble it later. Now, you're going to assemble that in third-party software. I'm a Premiere Pro guy. So for example, I'm working with a company that does some film production. So what they do is they record one half of the room, right? And they have their live action over there. And then over here, they keep their crew and the sound guy and the lighting guy and all that. Then they switch sides. They move live action to that side, put all the crew on that side. render those two videos out, each at 180, put them together in post, and as if by magic, you've got a 360-degree world filmed at two separate times.
Wow, that's really smart.
Yeah. So super easy way to do that here. There's more practical methods, like if I record in the house and my wife wants me to block out that the ironing board is out. So you can get rid of unwanted things like that too. So real simple. Fourth icon down right here is a way to install a logo. So you grab any JPEG image, I'd say just a logo, but any JPEG image, and you can use it to fill a spot underneath to hide your tripod.
Oh,
okay?
So you can potentially take a photo of the floor.
Exactly, so any JPEG. Exactly right. So I would photograph the floor, put that video on there, that still image on there, and then I could fill that hole at the bottom of the tripod. Usually when I do that, what I do is I actually shoot with the camera itself. So when I'm done shooting the video this way, I just turn the camera this way, take a still image with the video camera. That way I have the same video file, the same aspect ratio, everything else, real easy to plug in the bottom.
Wow, yes.
So this is a little production
hack.
trick
Yes,
for you, another
yes,
hack.
That's good.
There you go. And you can put one in the top and the bottom as well. So this is great for brands. If you want to put your company brand in the bottom who did the production and the company that you're working for at the top or vice versa, you can certainly do that as well. This icon here, the fifth one down, is horizontal stabilization. So this allows us to take the horizon and stabilize the horizon. And then that becomes a dynamic adjustment throughout the video. So if the camera did move, it will adjust that horizon to keep a flat horizon throughout the video.
Oh, that's useful. Like if you were running or like walking or something like this.
Exactly. Now, this is no substitute for capturing it properly in the first place. So highly recommend using some sort of a mechanical stabilizer, proper technique when you move a camera, all of those types of things so you don't make people sick. But this is a nice tool to help smooth things out and make things a little bit easier. But again, it's not a replacement for good technique.
Yes, of course.
Okay. And then we can get into some of the really fun stuff in here, which is a bit more of the advanced tools that most people don't even spend time to look at, but it is really incredibly powerful. So I'm thinking how best to demonstrate this. Let's go back to this video when I turn on the camera for a second. Actually, we'll just start it right here. Let's find it. Why not? What I'm going to do is I'm going to add the current frame, and you'll kind of see the video itself just made like a jump. I'm going to remove it for a second, and I'm going to put it back in. And you can see how the frame just kind of tweaks. And that's the computer going in and analyzing all of the frames, finding the stitch lines, and then correcting for them. So for example, this stitch line number 4 right here is going down through the edge of this desk. If I take it off, you see how part of the desk disappears?
Yes.
But then I turn it on, and it's back.
So you would add this frame on frames that the stitch lines are bad and you have...
Exactly.
Okay.
And the interesting part is that each of these stitch lines is actually managed based on a distance. So for example, stitch line number 4 is currently stitching at 3.4 feet, which is actually pretty accurate because I set that camera there and I remember it was pretty close to that desk. But if I wanted to fine tune it, I could just back it off or move it forward however I wanted to go at it, find where the camera really makes the failure, and then fine tune it back to the point where I want it to be. So even if the automatic features have a hard time with it, I can go in and do a manual adjustment later. And I might want to put a manual adjustment up here on the top. So here it's saying that the ceiling is only 3 feet away. This is further than 3 feet. So I'm going to just go ahead and bring this up. And you can see that as I bring it up, the stitch lines at the top are correct.
So these distances are the distance of the camera to those points. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. So
okay.
People who are really doing high-end productions where they really want to be critical on it, they'll actually take a tape measure with them and measure the distance off of the diagonal of the camera, because there are 4 stitch line errors that you'll run into, right? There's one here, 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 and here. They're very predictable. You know exactly where they're going to be. So if you just simply measure out the distance to your critical subject, I know that that's 7.5 feet. I plug in that dimension here, and as if by magic, it's corrected. Yes, it is one more step in the production phase, but that's what we do, right? We're producers. We're creating things. It's worth a little bit of effort up front to make a diary of your distances to really save time later on.
On that note, how close can a subject be before you get very visible stitch lines that you can't really fix?
So, if you are on axis of the cameras, there are 4 true stereo fields that the VUZE camera creates, right? If you are on camera axis coming in on the lens pair, you can get all the way down to about 10 inches, and we can give you perfect stereo all the way up. So you can get right into somebody's personal space in a VR headset. The risk points here on these diagonals, you want to be about 5 to 6 feet away at a minimum point in order to correct for it. And without getting too technical, but we'll get into it anyway, it's because unlike some 360 2D cameras that they basically share the same perspective, in 360 3D, you actually have to force a perspective difference in order to see depth. So in this case, we're using this as a left eye, and this lens on this side of the camera is a left eye. So this distance is 62 millimeters apart. So now I've got 2 points of view, 62 millimeters apart, right, that I have to go back in and I have to correct for. And that's why we need a little bit more distance on those corners in order to correct for that stitch line. If you get too close, there's just too much of a difference in those 2 points of view to make a clean stitch on it.
Okay.
Does that make sense,
Yeah, so
or,
that
or
makes
does
sense,
that
yeah.
overcomplicate
No,
it?
it makes complete sense.
Okay. So this is how I would go in and refine my stitching. The next piece in here, again, most people don't really pay attention to, is something called blending levels. So right now I've turned it off, and you can see that there's a pretty good exposure difference between this camera set and this camera set. So what this blending feature allows us to do is actually blend with opacity the difference on those and hide all of those exposure differences. So there's a low, and low is enough to get that out. I could go medium, or I could even go to a high. It does actually add some density to the video as well, so you have to take that into consideration. In this case, let's go ahead and keep it at low. Then we get into something called color matching. In this case, I can go to none, which basically allows each of the camera fields to work independently. I can have it calculate based on its nearest neighbor. In other words, if camera 1 is seeing this, what's camera 2 seeing, and 3, and it blends out that way. Or I can analyze the entire sphere and go as far as specifically choosing which part of the sphere I want to use to correct my global exposure for.
And what did you click to get this?
So what I did is I went into the color matching tab. I've selected the entire sphere, and then I'm adding a current frame. So I'm saying, based on this frame and beyond, I want you to use this set of exposure values to apply to that video. Okay? So I use this for kind of my gross adjustments, if you will. And then I apply that to the video, which brings me to the next tab, which I can then go in and say, for example, I love the contrast I'm getting out of this, but I really want to open my shadows up a little bit more, and then I really want to push a bit more on the saturation, right? So I can then go in and fine tune that just a bit further in order to get my video the way that I want it. If you're going to do your color grading later on, maybe you want to get this as neutral as possible, or maybe even want to desaturate it a little bit so I can have a base plate that I can color grade later on differently. Don't lose sight when you shoot VR video that proper video techniques and proper video production still are a necessary tool, right? It's a pretty powerful product, but it's not entirely magic just yet.
Yes.
You still have to be able to tell a story, bring that story together, and then create the visuals the way that you want them. Once you're done with your corrections, so that's basically what the software allows you to do, you would just hit the render tab, render down here, this button. This button here allows me to choose what I want to shoot. So in this case, I'm going to do 3D, 16:9 aspect ratio, 4K video. So it's going to be 3840 by 2160. The max resolution of the camera without interpolation is 3840 by 3840. Now you can actually do a 4096 by 4096. The problem with that aspect ratio is that most editing software can't easily edit it and output it back again to something usable. So the camera creates much more data than can easily be used, but the industry's coming. There are some different formats that I can go out to, including ProRes as well as WebM VP8 and 9. I have the ability to change my bit rate up to 120 megabits per second. I'm a purist, so I'll go to 120. But I will point out that if I go to auto, it's a 600, this particular video is about 1 minute and 35 seconds long, 694 meg. But if I go all the way up to 120 megabits per second, it's going to jump to a 1 gigabyte file. So just keep in mind that your bit rate's going to affect your file size, and you have to be able to manage that data. I can decide whether I want to go as an equirectangular or cube map.
And cube map is something new in this.
It is. It's really exciting. So it's a great way. It makes you think entirely differently on how you edit, because many of us are so used to seeing equirectangular. But cube mapping will give you about 20%, 25% better pixel utilization. So a video with the same pixel count, because we don't have to distort the top and the bottom. We can actually use that for true picture data, so you end up with a higher resolution video.
Yes, that's because one thing with equirectangular images, like the top and bottom, you can't really do much.
That's right, because we have to take that little tiny dot at the top, and we have to spread and repeat that all the way across the top. So that really leads to a lost pixel opportunity. And then I would just give it a name and press render. It takes about 1 minute to render 1 minute of video with the camera system. If you're running on a fairly decent PC, decent meaning this is an MSI laptop. It's running NVIDIA 1070 card, and that card gives us about 1 minute for every 1 minute of render.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you for all of this. This was super useful. I hope it was useful for all of you too. Thank you for coming again.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm happy to come back anytime. Let's just get people out there and get them shooting. That's the important part. All right, thanks.